There's a change happening in the world of relationships that many men are still unaware of. Women over 50 aren't giving up on love, nor are they secretly hoping someone will rescue them. And young men are still seeing things they don't. It takes money because when you love, nurture, hurt, and emotionally guide a family for decades, you stop loving what exhausts you. Stop calling it a relationship. Start calling it a birth. By the end of this video, you'll realize the truth that will completely change the conversation. This isn't a dating crisis, it's an emotional birth. So, if you're feeling this shift, and if the idea of starting over doesn't make you happy but is difficult, let me know in the comments. It's just a word, nothing more. It's not just about culture, it's psychology too. The second half of life doesn't always ask, am I chosen? But a more profound question, am I still enjoying myself? Carl Jung called this stage individualization. It's the process of achieving perfection, of not wanting to be loved, of not wanting to be completed, of becoming an inseparable part of yourself. When a woman feels fulfilled, she stops looking for a man to fill a void. She begins to evaluate everything from a new perspective, experiencing peace and tranquility. Statistics reveal a truth most people don't want to hear. Only 7% of women between the ages of 57 and 64 actively seek sex, compared to 27% of men in the same age group. By the age of 65, there are 4 men in relationships for every woman. But the interesting thing is that the problem isn't the number, it's the choice. Older women don't find it difficult to find a partner. They simply choose not to look. This is what surprises people and why so many good men miss their chance. They think being good enough is enough. Older women are looking for something entirely different. A quiet escape doesn't begin with denying infidelity, but rather with a woman's realization of the pattern she's lived in for so long. Comfort washes over her. Dinner is ready. The room is familiar. Her husband revolves around her. His day, his worries, his need to cope, his need for attention. He doesn't attack her. Instead, he fills the emotional void as he always does, as if it were his own. And she stands there in the position she taught her years ago. She knows how to prevent the conversation from turning into a confrontation. She knows which aspects of herself she needs to control, and which emotions she must suppress before she can swallow them whole. She appears calm on the outside, but something inside pulls her back slightly so she can see. That brief distance is the beginning of awakening, for only then can she perceive the subtle harmony that has shaped her life. It's something unwritten, unspoken, and it solidifies over time. When she's pleasant, the room is calm. When she reveals her inner world, the atmosphere becomes tense. When she's quiet, nothing goes wrong. The dishes get washed, appointments are delayed, and the most important part of the day remains unimportant. Then the question arises, what do I want? Before it's too late. This question isn't about dinner, but about identity. Jung calls the second half of life knocking on the door, the moment when the mind stops indulging in success and begins searching for truth, because the first half of life often rewards conformity. A man appreciates a woman who keeps things together. His other half, however, wants something else. This is the truth most people avoid mentioning. Most relationships don't end with infidelity. They end when a woman realizes she's present in his life but absent from it. It's not a lack of love, but simply indifference. After experiencing the feeling of disappearance, her fear changes. Loneliness is no longer as bad as it once was. Loneliness is silent, but real. In her solitude, she can hear her own voice again. She begins to fear returning to her old ways of communicating and starts to mend her spirit to make the room comfortable. This is where the journey of liberation begins. A woman reaches a point in her life where the question gradually shifts. It may no longer be, how do I make this work? But rather, why do I always agree? This is a significant step towards psychological awareness. For many older women, this time comes not with anger or frustration, but with clarity of vision. Little by little, and quite clearly, it became apparent that something fundamental was missing. Not love, not fidelity, but mutual respect. Take Margaret as an example. Her marriage didn't fall apart. It simply endured. Years of shared experiences, shared responsibilities, shared stories. From the outside, it seemed strong. She felt a kind of imbalance within herself. She maintained the emotional rhythm of the relationship, anticipated her husband's needs, calmed tensions, and kept things practical. After her youngest daughter had gone to university, 62-year-old Margaret sat in the kitchen one morning and realized she couldn't remember the last time she had asked her husband what he wanted for dinner, what he wanted to watch on TV, or what he wanted to say about his future. The divorce hadn't been dramatic. After 3 decades of holding her breath, she felt calm, as if she could finally breathe. People expected her to feel lonely after her divorce, but she noticed something surprising. Her morning routines became easier, decisions no longer required discussion, and her energy levels remained the same. She hadn't prepared herself before going out alone for the first time in decades. Later, when men showed interest, kindness, and calm, she stood tall, not because she was hurt, but because she had found a new starting point within herself. That was enough. No bitterness, no fear. It's a skill of perception. Carl Jung wrote that the second half of life requires us to let go of our expectations and stop looking for outcomes outside ourselves. When a woman reaches that stage, she no longer views relationships through the lens of potential or hope. She loves them not for their financial cost, but for their emotional cost. What does this require of my nervous system? What part of me must I suppress to protect it? When the answer is so clear, there's no room for argument or justification, only escape. Because if a woman has tasted peace, she will find it easy to maintain. So allow me to ask you a question without rushing. When was the last time someone asked you what you wanted and didn't rush to fill the silence with something of your own? Most people still don't truly understand why older women are reluctant to date. They assume they've run out of options and are hurt. But what's really going on is much quieter and more rational. She did the math, because after 50 years, her sense of time, her energy, her recovery, all change. A woman who has dedicated decades to giving begins to treat her inner peace like money. She starts spending it on experiences that bring her nothing back. It's emotional economics. Take Diana, for example. She's 58. She had her own home, her own routine, and a quiet routine that kept her life stable. The man she'd been dating wanted to take her life to the next level. He wasn't a bad man. He was kind. He had a plan. He loved her. But Diana didn't respond as she usually did. She didn't ask him, "Do you love me enough?" She didn't ask him, "What if I left you?" Instead, she asked a different question, one that most women in their 20s aren't allowed to ask. What do I stand to gain, and what do I stand to lose? When you tell the truth, things become clear. She might have a girlfriend, a travel companion, someone to eat with, and a warm presence by her side. But now she might lose something very important. Breakfast, a clean kitchen, and the ability to make plans without argument. The freedom to deal with other people's feelings, health problems, family tensions, or intense emotions. She can enjoy peace of mind knowing she's not responsible for another adult's inner world. This is the part no one calls work, because it doesn't feel like it. It feels more like being a good wife. But an old woman lived long enough to recognize this pattern. What begins as a romantic connection can transform into an internal struggle, and she ceases to pursue that role. Jung called this fallback projection. It happens when you stop treating another person as a missing part of yourself. You stop searching for someone to complete you because you finally realize that completion is an internal effort. When Diana chose herself, it wasn't selfishness, but rather a concern for her own well-being. It stemmed from her conviction, I won't sacrifice friendship for my peace of mind. Once you consider relationships from this perspective, you can't ignore it because the question then becomes, is he a good person? But rather, is this feeling mutual or is he gradually exhausting me? This is where the discussion becomes thorny because it's no longer about men and what a woman must do to be loved. Jung called this the shadow. Parts of the self pushed into the recesses to be accepted, not because they were wrong, but because they weren't good enough for others to feel comfortable with. For many women raised in traditional relationship roles, the shadow is filled with things they've been trained to hide. Many aspects, sharp aspects, aspects that threatened the image of the simple, delicate woman. She learned early on that love has conditions. If it's too direct, it's harsh. If it needs space, it's cold. So she did what most women do to survive. She developed herself. She softened the harshness of the truth. She clung to feelings she didn't truly hold. Over time, this adaptation became so automatic that she stopped noticing it happening. But in the second half of her life, something changed. The fear of judgment began to lose its power. The pressure to be chosen became less burdensome than the pressure to be true to herself. Her shadow and everything she buried begins to surface, not to destroy her relationship, but to rediscover it. This is why older women often look different after a divorce or after deciding to remain single. Not a sudden burst of power, but a fusion. She is a woman who cannot compromise with her soul. She began to reject him without trying to justify herself. She stopped narrowing her horizons to make the room comfortable. She chose solitude over self-denial after living a life in which she was gradually fading away. Once a woman finds her dark side, once she confronts her anger, her desires, and her need for freedom, she cannot return to a relationship that forces her to shut those aspects down again. She is not just strong, she is whole. But perfection also comes at a price. It makes some kinds of love unacceptable. You might expect an older woman to feel lonely after she's lost her man's attention. You might expect her to sit in an empty house wondering what she did wrong. But that's not what happens for most of them. What happens instead is peace. A quiet, still, mysterious peace. It might seem like a secret she can't accept because it feels so different from her previous life. If you live in a noisy house for a long time, you stop paying attention until the noise subsides, and then you suddenly realize how exhausted you are. This is what peace feels like in the second half of life. Not joy, but energy and tranquility. Jung says it's the soul turning inward and finally reclaiming the energy it expended on success and management. The self begins to reinvest in its inner world. Creativity returns, friendships flourish, spirituality becomes a lived experience, not just an idea. Here's the harsh truth behind it. Many women don't realize the weight of their burdens until they unleash them. So, if you've ever experienced this kind of silence, if you know the feeling of waking up struggling to control your emotions, leave a comment. Relief. This is the part that baffles many men. You hear older women avoid dating, thinking, but I'm a nice person. They believe politeness is enough, that quietness is attractive, and politeness is important. That's fundamental. But here's a truth most men ignore. A nice man isn't necessarily a safe partner, because safety isn't a moral quality. It's an experience that affects the nervous system. A woman might be with a man who never cheats on her, never yells at her, and never hits her, yet she still feels stressed and responsible, forced to control the emotional state of the relationship. This is what older women ultimately struggle with. In the first half of their lives, many of them accepted emotional imbalance because they considered it normal. They took over the emptiness. They explained the feelings. They appropriated mental states that weren't theirs. This would become a subtle act over time, because the second act, which no one calls birth, takes place in the body. So when the man says, "I am a good boy," the old woman calmly asks another question. Do you take responsibility for your inner life, or do you expect the woman to? That's why the phrase, "I am ready to travel," no longer appeals to her as it once did. She doesn't want a photo shoot. She wants someone who understands her discomfort without turning her into a therapist, a mother, or someone who controls her emotions. And this is precisely where many men get frustrated. They equate women's standards with cruelty and setting boundaries with bitterness. But what she's saying is simple. I don't want anyone. I want connection. And if a man doesn't fix himself, he can still be nice and still be dear to me. That's why kindness isn't enough anymore. In analytical psychology, we don't just change as we age. Our patterns change too. For most of a woman's life, the world elevates one role above all others, the role of the caregiver, the person who connects the dots, the person who remembers birthdays, understands humor, eases tension, and makes silent sacrifices to maintain the relationship. At first, this role might seem like love. But in the second half of life, something new begins to emerge. Not louder, not more malevolent, but deeper. It's the self-repairing self, says Jung. The soul ceases to live for justification and begins to live for essence. The masks that once protected you now suffocate you. This is where the wise woman comes in. She is not a desperate woman, but one who has finally found her inner strength. She does not rush, nor does she succumb to trials. She doesn't just change herself to be chosen. She's lived long enough to see what happens when you change your reality by accepting it. The change is subtle, but irreversible. The caring woman asks, "How can I achieve this?" The wise woman asks, "Does this honor who I am?" Don't confuse caring with intimacy. She no longer confuses the man's needs with her own goals. She may still be deeply in love with him, but she doesn't blame herself. For her, the relationship isn't the end goal. It's completion, a picture she likes. The circle is complete. In her youth, many women feel like unfinished stories, waiting for a man to complete them. A wise woman is like a complete circle. When a man enters her life, he doesn't complete her, but rather creates a bond with her. And when he disrupts her stability, she doesn't compromise on this truth. She runs away, not out of pride, but out of loyalty to her soul. This is the reality of relationships you never expected. Older women didn't stop caring about men because their hearts had hardened. They stopped because they had come to understand the full truth. They saw how often love hides behind a mask of stability, how often companionship is a pointless emotional effort, and how often they were told to be grateful for the changing circumstances that gradually weakened them. Then, in the second half of life, something changed, just as Jung described. The psyche stopped seeking acceptance and began seeking authenticity. The inner world became more vibrant than the social scene. So no, they are not alone. They are no longer negotiating their inner peace. They don't hate men. They simply stopped focusing on men. That's a big change. When you possess something, you don't attack it. You refuse to circle around it. Instead, a quiet strength takes its place. A woman who has tasted perfection doesn't seek attention. She turns to what she feels is pure within herself, and she doesn't confuse strength with intimacy. She doesn't confuse freedom of choice with value. That's why her circle of romantic acquaintances seems smaller now, not because there's a shortage of men, but because she won't return to a relationship that requires her to reform herself as a prerequisite. Love, if it exists, must be built on mutual respect and emotional responsibility. It should come without asking you to slow down. If it doesn't come, you won't fall. You'll keep going because this is the truth you never expected. Loneliness isn't the worst thing. Losing yourself is. So if you feel this change, express it in one word.